Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be reading The Race Against Death. In 1925, children in a remote Alaskan city were being struck down by a deadly disease. The cure was hundreds of miles away, across a frozen wilderness. There was only one hope: dogs. From his apartment window, Dr. Curtis Welch watched as the last ship of the fall season of 1924, the Almeda, pulled away from the dock of Nome, Alaska. In a few weeks, the freezing winter weather would almost completely cut off the town of Nome from the rest of the world until spring. The town's only link with the rest of Alaska would be one frozen and windswept dog sled trail. The Almeda had brought the doctor his winter supplies: cotton balls, ether, tongue depressors, thermometers, and medicines. Only one item had been either misplaced or lost: his order of fresh diphtheria medicine. Today, most children are vaccinated against diphtheria, a deadly disease that causes fever and sores in the throat. But in 1924, there were no vaccinations against it. Still, Dr. Welch hadn't seen a single confirmed case of diphtheria in the 18 years he'd been in Nome. Yet he knew that the disease strikes suddenly and is highly contagious. Without fresh medicine, Nome's population would be helpless in an outbreak. Dr. Welch prayed diphtheria would stay away for another winter. A deadly outbreak. Unfortunately, the people of Nome wouldn't be that lucky. Soon after the Almeda had steamed off, a native Alaskan family with 4 children arrived in Nome. The youngest was ill, and the doctor guessed the child was suffering from a mild infection. By morning, the child was dead. Within weeks, 3 other children in Nome died. Then, on Tuesday, January 20, 1925, Dr. Welch checked in on a 3-year-old boy named Billy Barnett, who had been admitted to the hospital 2 weeks earlier with a sore throat and fever. The boy had developed thick gray sores in his throat. Dr. Welch knew this could mean only one thing: diphtheria. In a matter of hours, the sores would block Billy's windpipe and kill him. The town's situation was desperate. With a single touch or sneeze, diphtheria could move from one warm body to the next. Dr. Welch needed 1 million units of fresh medicine to treat the town. By January 25, a small quantity had been located in Anchorage, a major city 1,000 miles away from Nome. It wasn't enough for the whole town, but Dr. Welch hoped it would be enough to keep the disease from spreading. But how could they get the medicine all the way to Nome? In 1925, there was no jet airplanes, rugged trucks, snowmobiles, or ice-cutting ships. Nome is located on a peninsula that juts out into the freezing Bering Sea. The sea was already partially frozen, making it impossible for ships to travel. The closest the one major railroad in Alaska came to Nome was the town of Nenana, 674 miles away. Nome's town officials came up with a bold plan. They would have the medicine sent by railroad from Anchorage to Nenana. From Nenana, there was but one reliable way to transport the medicine the hundreds of miles to Nome: dog sled. Super mushers. Town leaders hoped to find the very fastest teams of dogs and the most experienced and courageous mushers, as dog sled drivers are called. One musher would pick up the medicine at the railroad station in Nenana. 12 others would wait with their dog teams in villages along the trail. Each musher would travel a portion of the trail and pass the medicine to the next musher until the medicine reached the trail's midpoint, the village of Nulato. One particularly skilled musher, Leonard Sapala, would set out from Nome and travel alone 300 miles to Nulato to pick up the medicine and bring it back to Nome. Under normal circumstances, the journey from Nenana to Nome would take 30 days or more. Town leaders hoped their team of super mushers could make the trip in 10 days. It was a risky plan for both the drivers and the dogs, and there was no guarantee that the medicine would survive the journey. If the medicine were lost or frozen on the icy trail, hundreds, even thousands of children and adults in Nome would likely die. There was no other choice. It was to be a race against death. The journey began in Nome on January 27 when 47-year-old Sapala rigged up his 7 dogs and set out on the 300-mile journey to Nulato. He would have to travel one of Alaska's most hazardous trails and take a 42-mile shortcut across the frozen Norton Sound. The shortcut would be littered with ice rubble, frozen spears that could shred a dog's paws. With little warning, the ice might break up and carry the team out to the Bering Sea. Sapala had been chosen because he was the fastest musher in Alaska. If anyone could make it, it was Sapala. A single push. As Sapala raced west, Wild Bill Shannon and his team of 9 dogs were at the other end of the trail in Nenana, meeting the train, carrying the medicine. The crate of medicine weighed 20 pounds. It contained glass vials of amber-colored serum, packed in a padded container and wrapped in heavy quilts and canvas. Shannon loaded the crate onto his sled and set off for the village of Tolovana, where another musher was waiting. Normally, the 52-mile trip over frozen terrain took 2 days. Shannon was told to make the trip in a single push. Traveling through the night, as a rule, dog sled drivers avoided traveling in the dark and in temperatures lower than 40 degrees below zero. That night, it was 50 below. Still, Shannon made the trip in record time, pausing for just a few hours near the end to rest his dogs and warm his frozen body. 3 of his dogs were too exhausted to finish the trip, so Shannon left them to warm up at the trail outpost. He traveled the last 4 hours of the journey with only 6 dogs. When he arrived in Tolovana, his face was black with frostbite. Men rushed out from the roadhouse. They loaded the medicine onto another sled and helped Shannon into the warmth. The first part of the relay was done, but there were still hundreds of miles to cover, and an enormous blizzard was making its way toward western Alaska. Meanwhile, the situation in Nome was becoming graver by the hour. The situation is bad, Nome's panicked mayor announced in a telegram to leaders in Washington, D.C. The number of diphtheria cases increases hourly. By now, the entire country knew of Nome's plight. Newspapers and radios reported news of the epidemic. People across America prayed that the medicine would reach Nome in time. The final musher. At first, the mushers were lucky. Sapala made it over the dangerous Norton Sound without mishap. Nome's leaders added more mushers to the relay to the medicine, so the medicine reached Sapala days earlier than expected. There were now 20 men racing to save Nome. Sapala strapped the medicine to his sled and immediately turned around to head back to the frozen Norton Sound. The trip across was even more treacherous this time, but he made it. 78 miles from Nome, in the village of Golovin, the exhausted Sapala handed the cargo to another musher, Charlie Olson. Olson traveled 25 miles to the village of Bluff, where the crate was loaded onto the sled of the final musher, Gunnar Kaysen. The life-saving cargo was 53 miles east of Nome, but the monster blizzard had closed in, bringing powerful winds, swirling snow, and a wind chill of minus 70 degrees. 5 miles into his run, Kaysen's path was blocked by huge drifts of snow. Kaysen had no choice but to leave the trail and go around the drifts, hoping that his lead dog, Balto, would be able to find the trail again. It was up to Balto to sniff through several feet of snow and try to pick up the scent of the trail. The minutes crawled by as the dog searched through the snow. Kaysen's heart raced. His body ached with cold. Suddenly, Balto lifted his head and broke into a run. The team and the medicine were back on track. Over the next 20 miles, the winds beat at Kaysen and his dogs. The musher was losing his strength, and several times the sled flew off the trail, dragging the dogs with it. Heavy drifts made the going difficult. At last, at 5:30 a.m. on Monday, February 2nd, Kaysen and his dog sled team pulled onto Front Street in Nome. He staggered off the sled, stumbling up to Balto, and collapsed, muttering, "Fine dog." Within minutes, Dr. Welch had the medicine. The next day, it looked as if even the most severe diphtheria cases would recover. News dispatches went out over the radio and telegraph announcing the victory of the men and dogs over the worst that nature could throw at them. Balto and his fellow dogs became heroes around the country, as did Kaysen and Sapala. Nome was safe.